Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this fourth webinar organised by Futamura and the BBIA, the fourth in the series. And Andy will be talking about, firstly, what the learnings from the first three webinars were, and then the outcomes which we as BBIA and our members would like to see as a result of that. And we're delighted to have with us three of the government officials who are involved very, very much in the whole resource and waste strategies, and also the bioeconomy strategies, and notably Robert Vaughan, Tom Pye and Peter Cottrell. And thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time this afternoon and for being with us. This is a really interesting moment for us all. We are in a situation where everything seems to be in flux, everything is in.
Andy, I've just put you on.
Now, can somebody turn their mic off, please, because I'm getting a feedback. Please turn your mic off, whoever it is, Charles, maybe you, and I'm hearing my voice back all the time. Okay, as I say, we're in a moment of flux and transition, and how we come out of it in the next 2 or 3 years will be the subject of this. Thank you. I think it's yours, Charles. Please keep your mic off. So how we come out of this in the next 2 or 3 years will be the subject of today's discussion. So, Andy Sweetman, the chairman of BBIA and sales and marketing manager at Futamura. Over to you.
Thank you. Hi, can you just confirm my slides are visible? Hello?
Hello, Andy.
Yeah, can you hear us?
I can hear you, Andy.
Yes, your slides are visible, Andy.
Okay, thank you. Right, so yes, as David has said, we're in an interesting point in the whole question on plastics at the moment. What I'm going to look to do is give you a quick summary of findings from the last 3 of the 4 of these, and in particular explain where we believe compostables fit and what future steps need to be taken to get maximum benefit from them. Very important to say that this is not about plastics bashing. We live in a plastics world that brings many benefits, but it also, of course, brings a number of challenges. What we're talking about here is making sure we've got the right materials for the right application at the right time. So there are times when plastics are the best materials for the job, and there are times when plastics are being used and perhaps there's a better solution. And that's what we're going to try and focus on here. Which are the ones where we believe that compostable materials have a key role to play. Now, I'm very conscious that as the sales and marketing manager for Futamura and chairman of the BBIA and a past chairman of European Bioplastics, I have a clearly vested interest in seeing compostable packaging develop further. So why should you actually listen to me? Well, what I promise I'm going to do during the course of the next 10 minutes or so is only convey information which comes from other independent expert authorities, the likes of the Pew Charitable Trust, the MacArthur Foundation, findings from RAP and the UK Plastics Pact, advice on labelling from OPRL, and independent certification agencies. So it's not because I'm telling you, it's because the experts are conveying the same message. Importantly, let's remember composting is not an excuse for litter. Composting is a managed waste management process. We're looking to use the materials, take those materials from nature to begin with, use them in a packaging role to reduce food waste and improve food safety and get the products safely to the customers, and then bring that back to nature afterwards through organic recycling methods such as composting. And when we talk about compostables, we're only talking about materials which are independently tested and independently certified to the key standard, which is BEIS EN 13432. And that standard not only proves that the materials biodegrade, but it proves proper disintegration, and it also has stringent ecotoxicity testing so that we know that there's nothing harmful in terms of residues after the composting process. Also, well worth pointing out that the vast majority of compostable materials are typically derived from readily renewable, certified sustainable sources, and always worth asking your supplier how they prove the sustainability. There are different sustainability programs. In the case of the product that we make at Futamura, which is NatureFlex, it's essentially cellulose, so we're using FSC and PEFC certification programs, and there'll be other ones for different compostable materials. And so when you think about it, a compostable material derived from nature that fulfills its role as a packaging material and then goes back to nature afterwards is the absolute embodiment of a circular economy in action. So do people want these materials? Well, yes, they do. And just recently a survey commissioned by Populus demonstrated that over 85% of British consumers believe that there should be more compostable packaging as an alternative to conventional plastics, and over 57% of those will be prepared to pay more. So those are pretty compelling figures, but I think it's important to say, let's make sure we use those materials in the right place. So taking two extremes then, should we have compostable materials replacing, for example, a plastic bottle? Well, we don't believe we should, because a plastic bottle is recyclable. So the important thing there is to allow that recycling system to take place. So steer clear of areas where there isn't a problem or where there's a good solution already. Instead, take these materials to where you've either got a very problematic situation or where fundamentally there is still residues of food and drink in with the waste. And perfect examples of that would be a tea bag and a coffee capsule. I think we're reaching the point now where there's absolutely no reason why any tea bag or coffee capsule should be containing any level of plastic, whereas historically they've been quite strongly so. What's the scale of the problem then? Well, there's an absolute landmark study that's just come out during the summer called Breaking the Plastic Wave, and it predicts where we are, or it shows where we are in terms of plastics residues at the moment, and predicts forward to where we'll be in the future. And without taking action, what they're showing is that we're essentially going to triple the problem of plastic flow into the ocean by 2040. And really, really importantly in this report, it stresses there's no single solution to ending plastic pollution. What we have to do is all work together in our particular areas to solve this problem. And it makes 8 key recommendations for change or systems interventions. And they're designed in one of 4 ways, either to reduce plastic at source, to substitute plastic with alternatives in the right applications, to recycle more and more effectively, and where absolutely necessary, dispose in the most effective way possible. And that report was written by Pew, Charitable Trust and Systemic, together with input from expert authorities such as University of Oxford, University of Leeds, Ellen MacArthur Foundation and Common Seas. And the report, it's quite long, but it's pretty easy reading, and it's got some great infographics in there which highlight the issues. And this is the particular sort of numbers infographic, and what you can see there is there 8 system change recommendations: reduce, substitute, improve design, scale up collection, double mechanical recycling, develop plastic to plastic conversion, and ultimately dispose where you can't. And the 8th one being reducing waste exports, and we've all know about the scandals of British waste turning up on and dumping grounds out in Asia. And of most relevance to us in the compostables industry, then it's intervention 2, which is to substitute plastic with paper and compostable materials, and that's deemed to be able to contribute to a 1/6 of the overall challenge. And if we see that in a kind of graph, so 2020 being where we are today, our 2040 point at 450 million tonnes if we just carry on doing what we're doing now, and then you see the level of help by each of these particular interactions. And here in the light blue colours are paper, coated papers and compostables, contributing something like 17% of the way forward to do this. Very importantly as well, where it suggests compostables are the best fit, it goes into particular areas and applications, and it's particularly where you've got food waste contamination and where you have otherwise very difficult to recycle solutions such as flexible films and multi-layer laminates. And the study has a number of calls to action that are of relevance. So we're kind of looking for government for doing their bit in terms of the waste management structure, make sure we've got the right infrastructure in place to provide funding to help the development of plastic alternatives. We're looking to brand owners and retailers to work across supply chains on sustainable sourcing, to encourage the use of compostable substitutes, and to make sure that everything that they do meets the target of 100% reusable, recyclable or compostable. From a waste management point of view, what we want is standardization in separation and collection systems and good labeling. And then the call to action for paper and compostables was to make sure that we seize the opportunity to develop alternative formats and materials, improve resource efficiency and paper recycling. Now, this mantra of 100% of packaging to be reusable, recyclable or compostable, the aim is to do that by 2025. And that was originally set out by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in their work on the new plastics economy. And we see that in the packaging world today, coming into the UK market through things such as the UK Plastics Pact, which is essentially the Ellen MacArthur Foundation principles put into action on a national level together with RAP. And you see that key target again, 100% of plastics packaging, reusable, recyclable or compostable, very much the lead mantra now from RAP. And RAP and the UK Plastics Pact have done a great bit of work as well, publishing the first guidance on the best practice use of compostables. And it fits a bit with what I was saying earlier in terms of the applications, get the applications right. Anywhere where you're talking about food contaminated materials after use is the best way to do it. We're talking about food caddy liners, fruit and veg stickers, tea bags, coffee pods, ready meal trays, any kind of closed loop situation. Small format flexibles in particular, where conventional plastic recycling is just not possible due to the very tiny nature of those materials that will just fly away. Some examples of that already in the UK market. So you can see the caddy liner here that facilitates the food collection. Small format applications like twist wraps, fruit labels, huge issue in terms of contamination of compost by residual plastic fruit labels, all of which today can be done with compostable materials. Into the tea markets, little wrappers to keep tea bags fresh, such as tea pigs, and then Percol with their introduction of compostable coffee capsules. Glitter, which has been by definition a littering kind of plastic, today can be successfully dealt with by the use of truly compostable materials such as bioglitter. And if you want to see an example of these materials actually biodegrading in action, then there's a nice little video you can pick up on YouTube from a German customer called Samover, where they actually show their tea sachets going through the biodegradation process very effectively. From a consumer point of view, absolutely vital that we get the labeling right. We're talking about plastic looking materials in many cases. Customers have to be able to understand what to do with the waste afterwards. And I'm delighted that one of the speakers earlier on in the series was Margaret Bates, the CEO of the OPRL, On-Packed Recycling Logo System. And she set out what for them would be their key requirements to endorse the use of compostables within their scheme. And we are 100% in line with everything that they recommended. So we need to make sure that these are only the BSEN 13432 standard materials, make sure that on-pack green claims are in line with ISO 14021, and make sure we use simple and clear language with regards to both consumer and waste management groups, so that they know what's a compostable material and what isn't. And that actually is very much in line with the system which is already in place now in Ireland, which is the CRAE system. And So if you have a certified compostable material, the green bins, the food waste bins are opened up in the Irish system, as long as you've gone through all of the testing, and the relevant packaging will carry this food waste bin compostable logo that confirms it's suitable. And again, you've got that clear indication there. There's the word compostable, and you've got, in effect, the call to action to the consumer. It goes in the food waste bin. Nice, clear language. So looking to the future then, what can help us all in the overall plastics reduction goal and the increased use of compostables? Well, we want to see retailers and brands make sure they're meeting that customer demand, continuing to make sure that they're meeting the EMF and the Plastics Pact guidance in all that they do. Go beyond something that we are seeing with some retailers, which is a rather oversimplistic mono-material approach. The idea that maybe if you turn it into one plastic, it will work. Unfortunately, that's just not practical. You use different materials because they bring different technical properties into the applications. So use plastics where they're best, use paper where it's best, and use compostables where it's the best fit. At the waste management level, we need that labelling scheme as much as possible. And the way that we'll get that packaging together with the food waste back to composting is via the food waste collection system. It's already in place mostly in the regions, and it's just England that needs to get a more joined up approach and be ready by 2023, when it's mandated that food waste collection will be in place across the whole of the country. From a government point of view, there are opportunities with these materials. We're talking about readily renewable raw materials that can be produced locally. And the CBI and the NFU have actually realised the opportunities that these materials can bring to, should we call it UK PLC? A scheme that would promote the use of readily renewable raw materials rather than fossil plastics is helpful. And an example of that is in the US with the USDA Bio Preferred program. Another thing that could help a lot is to effectively exempt certified compostables from the plastics tax, or maybe treat the use of renewable raw materials in the same way as they're treating recyclate for exemption from the plastics tax. If you think about it, you can't turn a compostable material into recyclate because it's gone back to nature as compost. So it would be inappropriate to expect compostables to be meeting a 30% recyclate target. And one to get the best bang for your buck, so to speak, is we have a tendency in the UK to see composting and anaerobic digestion as being two mutually exclusive technologies. But best practice says you join the two of them up. Run through an anaerobic digestion phase first to create renewable energy, and then take it on to composting afterwards to create your fertilizing compost to improve soil characteristics. So let's get some more joined up thinking at that level as well. And that's already standard practice in countries such as Italy for exactly that reason, to get the best of both worlds. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for that, and I'll pass you back to David.
Thank you, Andy, and apologies to all for the initial technical blips. I had two browsers open, which is why I was getting my own feedback. Andy, just a couple of points quickly. Firstly, the one or two things you didn't mention, but what we will bring up presumably later in the conversation, is about the claims around compostability. You know, we're seeing a lot of materials, particularly in the UK, and I don't know why the UK, calling themselves biodegradable, but actually not compostable, and therefore misleading people into thinking that these can be composted. How do we deal with that?
Well, the key standard is BEIS EN 13432. If a supplier can't give you that assurance, then you have to question exactly what they are trying to promote to you. It's absolutely critical. We're talking about getting value back from the waste afterwards, and a managed process, nothing that in any way, shape or form condones littering. So that's the standard to look at. And if anybody else is peddling any materials so-called degradable in some way, shape or form, but they don't work in a composting type format, then you simply have to let them go. They're not going to help. They don't bring anything from a sustainability point of view.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you. Good, Andy. Well, you'll be here for the panel and the questions afterwards, which I'm sure will be multiple from the audience. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Robert Vaughan from Defra. And Robert has been for a long time now subject to my barrages and emails and visits talking about food waste collections in particular, but he's overall responsible for the collections systems that we are going to apply in England. And so, Robert, the floor is yours. Please tell us how you see these challenges which Andy has thrown down, and how Defra is actually looking at them at the moment, both from the collection point of view and also, of course, the EPR systems. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Hope everyone can hear me and can see my slides. Not once for yes, David. Okay,
yes,
so
see you.
thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. I'm going to talk to you about recycling and consistency in recycling, and also touch on extended producer responsibility provisions and consultations we're taking forward in both those areas. Sorry, I was pressing the wrong button. Okay, so this is based on. Sorry, I'll go back a bit there. The slide's not very sensitive. So anyway, so firstly, I want to talk briefly about the resources and waste strategy, and Tom might say more about this in his presentation as well. I don't know, but obviously, it's our ambition to leave an environment in a better state than we found it, and that's embedded in our 25-year environment plan, which we published in 2018. And we also published our resources and strategy for England in late 2018, where we indicated how we want to move away from a take, make, use and throw away society to a more circular economy society, where raw materials came in, were circulated around and were recycled as many times as possible to a truly circular economy, recycled or reused. And we also prevented waste as well. So our ambition is to increase recycling, increase reuse of materials and prevent waste. And as part of that process, we're developing some major reforms on waste and recycling. The reasons for our policy intervention to increase recycling in particular are the challenges we face now in getting beyond 45% and to increase recycling beyond there. Household waste recycling rates in England have risen dramatically over the last 2 decades, but for the last 4 or 5 years they have settled at around about 45%, and we know that we need to increase more and need to take some transformative steps in our approach to recycling if we're going to increase more recycling. We've also set ambitious recycling targets. Recently we published as part of our transitional CEP package to achieve a 65% recycling rate for municipal waste by 2035. Our municipal waste is all household waste and household-like waste that's produced by businesses or other activities in a non-domestic setting. So we have set high targets to increase recycling. We also know that householders are confused by what can be recycled and which materials can be recycled, and we want to simplify that process as well, so we can make it easier for householders and businesses to recycle. As the levels of business recycling are low, the figures we have are uncertain and not ideal to say the least. Our latest estimates suggest there may be around 50% recycling rate overall, but we want to understand those better. But we do want to increase business recycling rates dramatically to over 65%. And we also want to improve the quality of recycle that's collected, so we have more consistency and better quality in the materials collected for recycling. To that end, we've developed a series of 3 major waste reforms, and these are having greater consistency in recycling collections, which I'll come on to talk about in more detail, having an extended producer responsibility scheme for packaging, where the producers of packaging will bear the costs of collection and processing of that packaging to make sure that we are able to collect and recycle as much packaging as is feasible. and to achieve higher targets. And then finally, the deposit return scheme, where producers of obligated materials would actually ensure that they make arrangements for the collection of those materials and provide a deposit on them as well to encourage collection. We also have, as was mentioned by Andy, a plastic packaging tax coming in a couple of years' time, and that will cover plastic packaging and encourage at least 30% recyclable content for plastic packaging. We want to talk about consistency in recycling collections. Consistency in recycling is essentially about ensuring the same materials are collected from every household in England. We published a consultation last year, which ran for 12 weeks, and there was a very popular consultation with many responses to that. 1,000, nearly 2,000 responses altogether, including 500 from stakeholders. And we have a second consultation planned for early next year on further policy details for transition towards greater consistency and also statutory guidance as well. And we continue to work with RAP and other key stakeholders on how we develop a policy in this area. To say a bit more about what we mean by consistency in recycling, you will have seen that the Environment Bill was published over the late last year, and there was a second reading in January. It's now delayed because of the coronavirus, but hopefully it will come back in the autumn. But essentially, for household recycling, we want to have a set of 6 recyclable waste streams collected from all households, including flats, and these 6 streams would be paper and card, glass, plastic bottles, pots, tubs and trays and so on, metal packaging, and also weekly separate food waste collections and garden waste collections where for households with gardens. This will ensure consistency in what is collected, and we'll also be consulting on regulations or proposals for regulations to be have more clarity about the sorts of materials that should be included in the recyclable waste streams, what sort of plastics, for example, and considerations around food waste content. So we propose the waste streams must be collected separately from each other, as well as separate from residual waste. But there will be some provision for local decision making on the methods of collection. So where it's not technically or economically practicable to collect waste streams separately, or there's no additional environmental benefit in doing so. We'll also review those waste streams and add other materials to them as necessary. So for example, textiles may be added, or other materials may be added in due course. And as I said previously, we'll be publishing minimum service standards through statutory guidance for the collection of materials. When we consulted last year, there was quite an overwhelming support for having a core set of materials and also having a regular review of what be included. And we have, as I said, legislated for that through the Environment Bill. There's also strong support for having separate food waste collections, and we've legislated for that in the Environment Bill as well. And similar support for guidance. There was mixed support for a free minimum collection service for garden waste, and we're giving further consideration to that as part of our second consultation, looking at the evidence around carbon benefits in particular and costs. Caddy liners was an area we also consulted on in our previous consultation, and our proposal was that all the authorities must have a curbside collection of weekly separate food waste, and there was strong support for having free caddy liners in our last consultation. We are looking at that again and see what the costs and benefits are of this proposal, and we've engaged with stakeholders on that to consider that, and we'll be reviewing that for the next consultation in the spring. For businesses, our main proposals, they're broadly similar to what we have for households, and we estimate there are about 2 million businesses or other organisations that produce municipal or household-like waste, that's waste of a similar composition to household waste, and there's large scope to increase business recycling rates significantly from the current levels. We did, when we consulted, propose 3 broad approaches of having mixed dry recycling collections with a separate glass collection but no food waste collection, mixed dry recycling collections and a separate food waste collection, but no glass collection again, and mixed dry recycling, a separate glass collection and a separate food waste collection. As a result of the consultation, it was the greatest support was for having a separate food waste collection, a separate glass collection, and a mixed dry recycling collection. For the bill, we've taken a consistent approach to what we have for households, where there's a requirement to have 4 separate dry recycled waste streams and a separate food waste collection. And we're considering how best to approach that through the regulations we produce and the guidance we'll have for consultation next year. There will still be the provision to allow for technical and economic circumstances and also environmental benefits for mixed collections. And also we're looking at what support we can provide to small and micro firms, especially to make the transition to greater separate collection of recyclable materials. So we look in particular at methods how we can reduce costs through greater collaboration, sharing services, potential for waste franchising and other considerations, as well as potential exemptions for certain categories of firms. Turning to biodegradable and compostable materials, compostable plastic is currently estimated to account for around about 0.5% of consumer plastic packaging or packaging in the UK. Currently, compostable packaging is not mandated as one of the 6 recyclable waste streams, but could be added as a discrete waste stream in the future. This does not mean to say that compostable liners would not be eligible for being recycled as part of the food waste stream. Similarly for tea bags, compostable tea bags or compostable coffee pods. As I said, we'll be publishing regulations on these next year, or draft regulations rather, and we'll be consulting on these issues as part of our consultation next year. But if we were to make a discrete waste stream, we'd have to add to the 6 recyclable waste streams we already have. So important considerations for this are that the waste is suitable for recycling and composting, obviously, and that gives an environmental benefit. We also want to make sure that all English waste collection authorities, as waste policies obviously devolved, can make arrangements for collection in line with any of the conditions set. We also want to make sure there's a market for the material following collection, and all relevant stakeholders have been consulted. So the considerations here is, can we be confident the material placed in the market complies with standards? Andy Sweetman has discussed those standards already, and in all like destinations over a reasonable time frame, and will there be significant environmental consequences as a result of collection or treatment? I'm also ensure there's end destinations or treatment processes available for those materials, so they can be effectively composted. Come on to talk briefly about producer responsibility. As I said, we will be consulting next year at the same time as we consult the consistency on measures for producer responsibility for packaging waste. And this is to ensure that producers pay the full net cost for managing packaging waste consistent with polluter pays principle. So put in place the right incentives for businesses to design and use packaging that is more sustainable, and will also encourage greater recycling of packaging material. We are continuing with a UK-wide approach, where the devolved administrations have own arrangements for collection of materials, but we want to ensure a consistent approach in terms of producer responsibility, and we're taking a UK-wide approach there. And we consulted on broad principles for producer responsibility last year in 2019, and we're preparing for the second consultation next year. Policy proposals on compostables will be informed by the available evidence we have, including the core of evidence that was published earlier this year, and we need to consider how we address compostables across the UK framework as well. So moving on briefly to talk about the next steps. We published the Environment Bill, as I said, late last year, and we're expecting that to come back to the House probably later this autumn, but that's subject to the House of Commons committees to decide on that process. As I said, we're developing a more detailed proposal next year to consult in early 21, hopefully March, and we expect to implement proposals from 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Well done. That's a very comprehensive view. And there's a couple of questions from me and from the audience, and you know, I'm sure Tom and Peter will be asked the same question. But that is that, of course, Brexit and the COVID-19 have slowed down this process. Are we still on target to meet the deadlines for introduction of this legislation in by the end of 2022, as was originally mooted?
We're keeping the timescale under review. We are publishing it in our consultation in March next year, when we're aiming still to launch consistency in 2023. But there's lots of challenges in between now and then for both consistency and for EPR in terms of what we can achieve. But our aim is to launch in 2023 still.
Thank you. The other day I was on a webinar with the European Parliament and with the Commission, and the Commission sort of let out of the bag that they hope by 2025 to introduce standardisation collection across the whole EU in terms of the colours of the bins and the colours of the bags that people would use. This would be obviously phenomenal from Finland to Malta, or from Portugal to Ukraine, to have the same colour bins. Are we looking at doing that in the UK as well as part of the consistency?
We did consult on standardising bin colours last year, and there was a lot of interest in that, but we also recognise there's a significant amount of challenge in achieving that. In England alone, you know, wheelie bins and so on have quite a long life expectancy, and their replacement schedule is quite elongated. Something like 20 years sometimes can elapse before a bin needs replacing. And whilst they are made of recycled materials, which is a good thing, and they can be recycled, I think we are not proposing at the moment to standardise the colours of bins. We'll certainly watch with interest how the other European countries manage to achieve a standardised approach within a 5-year time frame, and that'll be something to
no, I think within 5 years they want to have the legislation in place.
Oh, right. Okay.
Then the implementation of it, I think, will take perhaps a few months longer.
Yes. But at the moment, we're not proposing to consult that area again. So we'll keep it under review then.
So two last comments, and that is, please don't think that anybody from the BBIA or anybody from the composting industry is asking for a separate waste stream collection for compostable packaging. I mean, that would be completely absurd. But what we are asking is that it is recognised that where those materials are certified compostable, that they can be collected with food waste collections. And the second point around EPR, and again, as you know, we've said this with you many times, Robert, that we're not asking either for a separate EPR system for just that small amount of packaging, but that the money that we pay into that EPR system goes back to the benefit of organic recycling, rather than go back into the general pot, which may be for plastics or for paper or whatever.
Thank you. I think it's be important to make those points when the consultation arises next year, as I'm sure you've been making to my colleagues in the EPR teams already, and when we have discussions. But yes, I think that's a reasonable request to make from BBIA. I can understand where you're coming from on that. So.
Okay, thank you. Good. Thank you, Robert. Please remain available for the panel at the end of this. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Tom Pye and Peter Cottrell. Now, Peter and Tom, you have a sort of joint presentation both around the standards and around the bioeconomy. Which of you is going to go first?
Hi, David. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, perfectly. I can see you both.
Good. I'm happy to start. I mean, I'll start with just a brief intro, and then perhaps Peter can introduce himself as well, and then I can kick off the presentation.
Thank you for joining us. Go ahead.
For those who haven't met me, my name's Tom. I work in Defra. I lead our resources, waste and plastic strategy team. So our sort of primary interests are on single-use plastics and how we can reduce pollution from single-use plastics, but we also lead on our sort of broader plastic strategy, as it were, and therefore have a very strong interest in biodegradable and bio-based plastics. I'll just pass over to Peter to briefly introduce himself.
Thank you, Tom. I'm Peter Cottrell, and I have pleasure of being in the team which is both the BEIS bioeconomy team and also deals with conventional plastics. And you can make of that what you will, but I'm one of the people that was responsible for producing the bioeconomy strategy a couple of years ago and issuing the call for evidence on plastics about this time last year, wasn't it? Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks Peter. So I'm just going to give a sort of verbal update really on the call for evidence that Peter mentioned, a bit of background on why we did it, what we are hoping to achieve from it, and a progress update, I suppose, on where we've got to. Can I just check, David, how long do we have before the panel? Because I think we might be a bit over time.
Go ahead, relax. I mean, you know, there's roughly about 15 minutes for the two of you.
Okay. Great. All right. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. So apologies. The last question I'm going to ask you, David. Can you see the
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes. Great. All right. So as Peter mentioned, Defra and BEIS last year published a call for evidence on standards for bio-based, biodegradable and compostable plastics. And that's what I want to focus this presentation on. There were kind of three primary drivers for this, which I'm going to scroll down and hopefully everyone will be able to see. Yeah, so there were kind of drivers for this and three key objectives, I suppose, in terms of what we were seeking information on. Number one, the overall sustainability of bio-based and biodegradable plastics, particularly in comparison to so-called conventional alternatives. We were seeking information as well on existing standards in relation to biodegradability and how or if they might or should be promoted. And then finally, on the design and implementation of standards, or of future standards, I should say, to ensure that what they are applied to fully biodegrades in a reasonable time frame in a specified environment. So they were the three sort of key objectives, I guess, and there were a number of underlying drivers as to why we're interested in this, not least the resources and waste strategy, which Robert mentioned. I'm sure, I imagine, I suppose, that a lot of people are familiar with that, but essentially that sets out the government's ambition to manage resources more efficiently and to minimise waste. And there are a few key objectives in that relate to plastics, not least that all plastic packaging placed on the market should be recyclable, reusable or compostable by 2025, and that we want to eliminate avoidable plastic waste by 2042. So that was kind of part of the background for this. Also, we have the 25-year environment plan, which again this very much supports, and more recently, but equally relevant, the government's commitment to net zero emissions by 2050, and of course the BEIS bioeconomy strategy as well, which seeks to grow the UK bioeconomy. So there are a number of kind of underlying drivers for this, and as I said, what you can see on the screen are the kind of three primary objectives for the information that we were seeking. I should sort of clarify that this was very much a call for evidence rather than a policy consultation. So there were not, for example, firm proposals on how we would use the information or what we want to do in this space. It was very much aimed at kind of seeking technical information that would inform policy positions in future. So I'm just going to scroll down again, and actually just to add, this call for evidence is still sort of freely available online. You can just Google it, and it should be fairly easy to find. It is now closed. It closed last October, but hopefully will serve as a useful reference document. So one of the other drivers that I haven't touched on so much is the kind of confusion that we observe primarily amongst consumers, but to an extent amongst some businesses as well, around the different terms in this space. So between bio-based and biodegradable plastics, for example, we often see sort of things referred to as bioplastics, and our view and the view that's set out in this call for evidence is that that these are essentially two different properties that a plastic may or may not have. So a bio-based plastic is a plastic made from a polymer derived from plant-based sources, whereas a biodegradable plastic is one that can be broken down at end of life into simple compounds like CO2 and water. So a plastic may be both, or it may be one or the other. And again, the confusion that we see about this was part of the rationale for running this call for evidence, to try and sort of get some more clarity on this. So there are 6 main areas to the call for evidence, which hopefully you can sort of see here. Bio-based plastics, biodegradable plastics, compostable plastics, standards, certification and labelling, and impacts on waste processing. And the information that we were seeking and the drivers for seeking that information were slightly different for each. And actually our interest in each one was slightly different as well. So for example, on bio-based plastics, one area that we are particularly interested in is their kind of overall sustainability or environmental performance in comparison to conventional fossil fuel derived plastics. So we are aware, for example, that the consensus would appear to us to be that they are generally less carbon intensive, for example, but equally there seems to be some evidence that on other environmental indicators they are sort of worse performing, as it were. So what we are interested in is A, that information in the first place, but B, the means by which we can weigh up those different environmental factors and sort of make a judgment on what truly is more sustainable. With biodegradable plastics, a particular interest for Defra is what their role is within a more circular economy. As was kind of alluded to in a prior presentation, there are concerns from some that the use of biodegradable plastics could, for example, encourage littering. That's not to say that that's Defra's view or the government's view, but that certainly those concerns exist. So what we are interested in is the sort of stakeholder consensus on the extent to which biodegradable plastics have a role within a more circular economy. And that's similar for compostable plastics, which we see as a kind of subset of biodegradable plastics. As was alluded to, we are aware that there is a kind of existing and accepted standard in England or in the UK in relation to these, but nonetheless we're interested to the same extent on what role these may have in a more circular economy. In terms of standards, a kind of key question for us is the extent to which the existing standards apply in sort of open environment settings. Again, we are aware of a kind of range of stakeholder concerns around some things which are claimed to be biodegradable appearing not to be, or certainly not being so when they escape into the open environment again. So again, that's what we're interested in was kind of stakeholder consensus on the efficacy of those standards. Certification and labelling is very much linked to that. In particular, we're interested in sort of how this information around biodegradability and bio-based content should be communicated to consumers. And then on waste processing, again, very much linked to the circular economy question, and particularly for biodegradable plastics. We're interested on the extent to which they are or can be compatible with the waste management system. So they were the 6 main areas of the call for evidence. As I say, it's still openly available and accessible whilst it has closed, and we are not kind of formally accepting responses. we always welcome more information on these areas, and please feel free to send anything through of relevance. I assume my contact details are kind of have been shared. If not, I'm sure they can be, and like I say, please do send anything through. So in terms of a progress update and where we are, so the call ran from July, I believe, to October last year. And we are in the process of analysing the responses with a view to publishing a government response and a summary of responses by the end of this year. Fair to say, I think that our timeframes have been somewhat set back by wider events and by the coronavirus, but we very much hope and expect to publish the response by the end of this year. Obviously, we're kind of still in the process of going through some fairly detailed and fairly technical responses, and so I can't sort of share too much about where we are going because we need to go through the sort of relevant clearance processes that we always have to in government. But there's a few things I think we can say, and I think number one, as I alluded to at the beginning, this was very much a call for evidence and not a policy consultation. So what we will be setting out is simply what we got back and what the kind of consensus and balance of opinion was, but in relation to policy, very much a kind of direction of travel rather than sort of firm policy proposals. Again, this was a call for evidence, and we want to give a sense of where we see policy going or how we see these areas sort of fitting into existing policy, but this is not a sort of, I wouldn't expect kind of substantive policy changes. Oh, hang on, sorry, I'm getting something's come up on my screen. Is my presentation still working?
Yes, I can still see it, Tom.
Okay. Okay, and the other thing that we would like to do is to just set out in more detail where we think further evidence would be useful and where we see as priorities for further research. So, as I say, we very much hope to get this out by the end of the year, and we expect to. And actually, I didn't say at the beginning, but I'm sure there will be people on this call that responded, and just to say a big thank you to anyone that did. It's very much appreciated. And as I said, whilst it has closed and we're not sort of accepting formal responses, if there is any kind of information that you think relevant or helpful, please do send it through, and we always welcome that. So
Thank you, Tom.
I think that's probably all I wanted to say. I'll just pass over to my colleague Peter if there's anything that you want to add. Peter, are you there?
I certainly am. Well, thank you, Tom. To be honest, I thought that was a first-class presentation, but then, perhaps I'm a little bit biased. I thought it was really good. Just to back up a couple of points there. I mean, the theme and the whole point of the call for evidence rather backs up the strategy, bioeconomy strategy itself, which brought into play the point that bio-based alternatives might be suitable in specific circumstances, and also the area of labelling and consumer information, which are very relevant. So they're two things that are both in the bioeconomy strategy: consumer awareness and innovation, that then went in the call for evidence on plastics. A couple of other things very quickly, because I know we're pushed for time, is that they're my contact details on the call for evidence, but exactly as Tom said, although the call for evidence is called, we remain in BEIS, the bioeconomy team, and are very happy to hear views from stakeholders. And as Tom, I think, also said, we are aware, it's taken a long time to go through the responses we received, longer than we'd have hoped, but I'd have hoped that people are aware of the really strange times we've been through since that call for evidence was issued, and we really are doing our best to get this sorted out and move on to what we do next. Thank you again, Tom.
Thanks, both of you, and a series of questions from me and from the audience. Now we have a system here, this Microsoft Teams system, whereby only one person can be shown on the screen at any one time. So, Robert and Andy, if either of you are going to be asked a question and want to intervene, then you have to turn your video on, and you will come up on the screen. There we are. You're there. Oh, good. Okay. Well, we can see you all. Oh, there you are. Robert, you're there as well, I hope. Good. Thank you all. We are humble and modest enough as members of the BBIA to realise that our part of the packaging mix is only a small part. But any of you have a car, you'll probably put lubricant oil in the engine, and you know that if you don't do that regularly, the whole car will seize up, and the engine will seize up. And this is how we see the role of compostable materials, as being part of the lubricant that ensures that big beast of a car, in other words, food waste, gets back to soil and gets back to treatment cleanly. None of you actually in your presentations, apart from Andy a little bit, really mentioned the whole nexus between packaging, compostables and soil quality. And you will all be aware of the Environment Agency's attempts now to reduce plastic contamination going into food waste treatment plants and reduce the amount of plastics going to soil. And this is where we really see the key role of compostables, not in substituting plastics necessarily, but in ensuring that what goes through the food waste treatment system does so cleanly. So that's the first comment, and really to throw that open to you, because we tend to focus a little bit on the materials, but we actually should be focusing really on the systems into which they fit.
Who's going first?
More a comment really than a question. But if you wish to comment, please do.
I think I agree with what you're saying there, David. I think from some work that we've done in the industry shows, for example, that for every ton of food waste that you divert to organic recovery rather than landfill will save you about a ton of fugitive CO2 emissions. Take it through AD as your first stage, and you can create something like up to 850 litres of biofuel, and then mix it 50-50 with garden waste, and you get fertilising, soil improving and structure improving compost. So you can take that big problem and turn it into something like a triple asset. And that's what we've got to be aiming to do with these things. And this is the point. And I think this is, from my side, why is that breaking the plastics wave report so important? Because it's the first time I've seen in really simple language that someone like me can understand that we all have our role to play, and we all bring a certain percentage of the ultimate solution together. And it'll help get us away from this kind of plastic or compost. It's got to be plastic recycling and composting. And we need to make sure that we get the retailers, the brands, and our infrastructure in place to facilitate exactly that, and not have this simplistic battle of wills between the two industries that actually should be complementary.
Thank you, Andy. I don't know, Tom or Robert or Peter, if you want to pick up on that point.
It's Robert here. Yes, I think I would agree with that. What Andrew's just said. Actually, I think it's important to have a complementary approach here to promote maximum recycling of materials, plastics in particular, and to look at the complementary role that compostables can play in the areas he mentioned in his presentation. Actually, I think that's important. And I mean, I think we'd certainly want to look at how that balance can be achieved. Yes.
Thank you. A question maybe more for you, Tom, or Peter, and around the plastic tax. We haven't got any colleagues from HMT with us, but when will the plastic tax come into force? 2022, I believe.
I believe it's April 2022. Though I have to admit to not being the expert on this, but I'm fairly sure it's April 2022.
Okay, well, that was a question from the audience. A last question from me, really. Are you following and presumably you are following because I send it to you and I hope you read them, what is going on in the rest of the world. You know, China has just introduced from 2021 that all single-use plastic has to be compostable, mandated, obligatory. Of course, it's very easy to do this in China because you don't have this long, drawn-out democratic consultation process. But some people will ask, well, isn't that the way to go?
I mean, we certainly follow what's going on elsewhere, and we certainly read your emails. But I think fair to say that that's probably not in the pipeline. But yeah, we certainly follow these things.
I'd be interested to know what Andrew's views on that. Actually, I think having all single-use plastics as compostable might be quite challenging in many ways, because it might present confusion for householders in particular, but also for issues of contamination, which I think you mentioned, David, earlier. So I'd be interested to know what Andrew's thoughts are on that, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think why I think the RAP guidance is so good is because it starts to identify a range of applications where recycling is patently not possible. It's just not practical, and where actually collection via the food waste stream is totally practical and will solve that particular area. From a volume point of view, I mean, the idea of switching all single-use plastics, which by definition actually means all flexibles, really, into compostables, it's certainly not possible rapidly. It's certainly not possible in every single application. But if going step by step and thinking about the particular applications and the context of the applications, I think is important. Let me just give you an example. In the press last week, there was the example given that Ribena drinking boxes, little cartons, they were moving the straws to paper away from plastic because, of course, the risk of littering of that straw and so on. Very, very sensible approach. I'm now wondering, well, what about the little plastic film which the paper straw is sitting inside? I'm hoping that Ribena have been giving that the same kind of thought, because those two things are linked together. They're facing the same risk of littering or the same opportunity for disposal. So make sure that particular little flexible wrapper is just as compostable as the paper straw itself. So step by step, I think is the way to do it, and think about the application.
Some of our members, Robert and Tom and Peter, have looked at the various strategies and thought that too often these are taking a current point in time and not proposing a vision for where we should be in 5 or 10 years' time. And Tom, many times you said we have to look at where these fit into the current infrastructure. Well, shouldn't we admit actually that the current infrastructure is probably not suitable for purpose for many, many materials? And actually what we should be planning for is where we want to be by, say, 2030, because that's how long it's going to take to get the infrastructure right.
Well, I hope, I suppose, that by having done the call for evidence, that we are taking a more kind of forward-thinking approach, particularly with, say, bio-based plastics. I mean, they would appear to represent a kind of tiny percentage of what's placed on the market, but we, you know, in line with things like net zero and the bioeconomy strategy, we are actively seeking information on whether or not these would be a more sustainable alternative. So I'm not sure I would agree, and I hope that that's evidence of that. And I think in terms of the waste management system, I think that, you know, we have to consider that. But it is one consideration amongst many. Robert,
do you want to add anything there?
No, not really. I think also just to mention the resources and waste strategy, we set out what our ambition was for the next 25 years. And I think we're looking at how we can achieve that. But as Tom said, we have to look at how we evolve towards that situation rather than have a revolution in what we're doing.
Yes, we need evolution, of course, because systems are slow to change. Absolutely. A last question for you, Peter, and then the bioeconomy strategy, since it was published, I think, in December 2018, has seen no further government publications relative to it. But I know, because I participate, that a lot of background work is going on. Are there next actions which you can share with the public on the bioeconomy strategy?
Peter, you're muted.
Peter, you need to turn on your mic.
Thank you, David. Good timing. I think you all appreciated I disappeared for a while. My whole IT crashed, so I've completely gone and come back again. But the bioeconomy strategy, yeah, thank you. I'm slightly at risk of going back to old excuses about Brexit and coronavirus and stuff like that, which is part of it. But the breadth of the things covered in the bioeconomy strategy means that we've had to do a little bit of a refresh on how much we focus on it and how we focus on it, to give some help to the different working groups and the different work streams. So although I haven't got news on any particular things, any particular actions that are coming soon from it, I can just give a basic point that we're trying to put some more resource into it, give it a bit of an oomph, and hopefully over the coming months, people will hear a little bit more about what's going to come out of the bioeconomy strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'm aware that we've come to the end of the roughly about an hour that we gave ourselves here. Just a couple of questions here coming in from the audience. One, if you are asking questions on sustainability of biomaterials, are you making comparison with fossil fuel plastics? And surely you need to have the sustainability data on conventional plastics, but you don't seem to ask for those in the consultation. This was, I think, probably directed to Tom and to Peter. The question on oxo-degradable technologies from the audience. Does Defra and BEIS support oxo-degradable plastics? We have asked, and we and other trade associations have asked for those to be banned, and Scotland and Wales have just announced that they will be going ahead with the ban, but we have no clear direction of travel here in England. So just a couple of quick ones before we close. Hardest ones at the end, eh?
Yeah, it's true that we didn't explicitly ask questions on the sustainability of conventional plastics, but I suppose we would argue that that was kind of inherent in asking the questions about bio-based plastics in comparison to conventional plastics. I mean, we always welcome evidence on things like this, particularly given that, you know, since that was published, we've committed to net zero. This is something that we always welcome evidence on. So
can I quickly chip in and say, Tom, I think that's a fair answer. Yes, you're right, David, it wasn't explicit, but the fact that we got evidence on one and having seen the evidence allows us to undertake the process of comparing one with another. But that's a reasonable question, David. And
on oxo-degradable plastics, our position remains what it was in the resource and waste strategy, that there is insufficient evidence to support claims that they really do biodegrade in the open environment in a reasonable time frame. But we did ask a question on this in the call for evidence, so we'll set out some further information in our response.
David, can I just add a little comment just in terms of the question there on the conventional plastics? One of the challenges you face with novel technologies, and these biomaterials are essentially novel technologies, is that they haven't reached the economy of scale or the level of efficiency yet that you have from the mainstream products. So, for example, to compare the life cycle assessment of polyethylene, which is produced by the mega millions of tons, with a biopolymer with similar properties that's produced at a level of 10,000 tons or less, you're comparing apples and pears. You're kind of asking Einstein to have performed at the age of 3 the way he performed at the age of 33. They're just not there. And it's, if you're in danger then of having a very negative view of new technologies, which is unrealistic and unfair. So you need to try and forward predict as well where these technologies are going to get to make sure you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Precisely, I like that analogy of Einstein at 3 and 33. Well, we've seen that the growth of compostables is actually quite rapid. Corbion just announced the other day a new 100,000 ton facility with Total on producing PLA in Europe. So we can see that those facilities and the size and dimensions of production is increasing very, very rapidly. Maybe a last question for all of you. As you know, HMT have decided to include the bin liners for food waste collections as a plastic that will be taxed, which is rather paradoxical. If the government is going to give these for free, HMT will be taxing something which Defra will be paying out. Have you raised that question with HMT?
It's Robert Vaughan, not something I've raised myself with HMT, but it's an interesting point, David. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we have raised it with HMT. You know, if you're going to be giving away bin liners and they're going to be taxing them, well, then it's a little bit paradoxical, isn't it?
If we were to support the compostable line, it would be compostable liners that we'd be supporting rather than general liners. But yes, it's an interesting point. Yeah.
Yes, because compostable liners would be included according to HMT under the taxation. Mm-hmm. So I just signal that to you. I think we've come to the end. I'm sure there's a lot more questions there, but we've been going now for an hour and a quarter, and therefore I'll draw the webinar to a conclusion. Are there any last comments that any of you would like to make before I do? No? Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Please.
I'm just saying thank you for the opportunity, David. That's all.
Well, no. Well, it's beholden upon me, therefore, to thank you, Robert, Tom, and Peter for attending. We will be waiting with bated breath the outcome of the various consultations over the next few months, and of course participating in the new ones that come up in 2021. And we will be, of course, bombarding you with emails and telephone calls in the meantime. Thank you to Futamura for having organised this and sponsored this series of webinars. And to remind you, we will be again on air on October the 1st with a webinar which will be, for a change, nothing to do with compostable packaging, which we look into other biomaterials and how they fit into the bioeconomy. And back on October the 13th, in which with Systemic, we will be presenting the Breaking the Plastic Wave report. So if you're interested in knowing more about that groundbreaking report, October the 13th, put it in your diary. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, all for participating. Thanks for the questions from the audience, and thanks very much again to the speakers.